I was born just after the Second World War. In 1944, the north of Ireland was like an enormous armed camp where there were troops from all sorts of places preparing for the Normandy landings in 1944. A very large number of American GIs, for example, were stationed in the north. British soldiers, of course, and other nationalities. I mean, there were Polish soldiers, for example. After the war, there had been a sort of hospital camp for Americans in the woods just opposite where we lived. But of course, by the time we came along, that camp had become kind of derelict, but there were still stone floors, and in particular there were two air raid shelters which, you know, had survived and which became a very important part of our sort of playground. People had stories about the troops stationed in the north of Ireland, particularly about the Americans. The Americans got on, as you might expect, particularly well with the nationalist Catholic community, and renewed, as it were, that sort of relationship that has existed for a long time between Ireland and America. I remember listening to the stories, and I think that the sequence of poems in Northern Spring arose from that. I set myself to imagine what life must have been like for those soldiers, and to kind of recreate their experiences, particularly in Normandy and when they returned to America. I suppose the sequence was also written at a time when the IRA and various other organisations thought of and spoke about soldiers as legitimate targets. I mean, it's as though people were encouraged not to think of them as human beings at all. And, you know, I think in a way the whole mood of this sequence runs counter to that. You know, I think you get a strong sense of the soldiers as individual human beings. I'll read a couple of poems from this. One is called Apples, Normandy, 1944, and it's a portrait of a war artist who becomes disillusioned with his official function, which is to record the war. There are other things that he would much prefer to be drawing and painting at that time. Apples, Normandy, 1944. Was it D+10 or D+12 we caught the war artist sketching apples? I'm sick of tanks, he said. I'm sick of ruins. I'm sick of dead soldiers and soldiers on the move and soldiers resting. And to tell you the truth, I'm sick drawing refugees. I want to draw apples. For all we know, he's still sitting under a tree somewhere between the Seine and Omaha, or russet with pleasure, striding past old dugouts towards the next windfall, sketchbooks accumulating as he becomes the Audubon of French apples, or works on the single apple, perfect, planetary, of his imagination. See, in the early days of the Troubles in the north of Ireland, writers came under pressure to write about the Troubles, rather as the war artist comes under pressure to travel a certain road. It was interesting. On the one hand, if you if you didn't write about the Troubles, you were regarded as somehow avoiding them, not fulfilling your kind of function as a writer and so on. On the other hand, if you did write about the Troubles, very often you were accused of exploiting this and trying to make a name for yourself as a war poet, so to speak. This one is called Clio, Oklahoma, and the speaker is a GI who comes from that particular town in America. So there's a sort of portrait of him leaving home. Clio, Oklahoma. I knew he'd be a big shot. My mother's words in the third person, as though I'd already gone. She stepped back through shadows, relinquished me to sun and bunting, a street of cheers and smiles from there to the depot. The mayor struck a pose for a possible statue, but the bandsmen stayed in tune until I waved from the steps of the Greyhound. Already I belonged to somewhere else, or nowhere, or the next photograph. The mayor spread his arms and had trouble with history. There was dust everywhere. It was too late to cry or too early. I heard the mayor say, "We've had history before now, folks, in this town. There'll be more history soon." The Lord Mayor of Belfast really did say this at the launch of a history of Belfast in the City Hall. He talked about the immense history that we'd had so far and expressed his certainty that there was lots more around the corner. The title of the poem, Clio, Oklahoma, it is a real place, but I also had in mind Clio, C-L-I-O, the muse of history. Some of the poems in this sequence have a kind of macabre, tongue-in-cheek quality, such as this one, which is called I Stepped on a Small Landmine. I stepped on a small landmine in the bocage and was spread with 3 others over a field of burnt lucerne. The bits they shipped to Georgia at the request of my 2 sisters were not entirely me. If dead men laughed, I would have laughed the day the Committee for White Heroes honoured me, and honoured too the mangled testicles of Leroy Earl Johnston.